Everybody, I hope you had a warm weekend. Felt a little like spring, and some of these numbers in COVID land remind me of spring as well. You can see here from this first chart, if you can get that up, guys. We had, this is 3-day numbers, so it's sort of interesting. A lot of cases, 3,300 cases, a lot of tests, almost 90,000 tests. That means for the week, over 180,000. So by far the most we've ever done, which allows us to get ahead of COVID, be able to track and at least find folks who are infected earlier and treat them earlier. Fatalities, 27. That's a 3-day number, but it's still a high number. Our number of fatalities has gone up monthly for the last 3 months. Number I really want to focus on is current hospitalizations, 94. 3-day number, but 94 is still a lot. We had probably, we've doubled the number of hospitalizations just in the last few weeks. And we're watching this carefully. We still have a lot of capacity in our regular hospital beds. We have only 50% use in our ICU, intensive care. The regular hospitalization beds, we have the ability to expand that pretty quickly as need be, as you remember from the field hospitals. But these numbers are concerning, and they're sort of reflective of what's going on around the country. I can just tell you, these Johns Hopkins released some interesting analysis, which I found share with you. If we had our first COVID infection on January 21st, it took 98 days till we had our 1 millionth person tested positive for COVID. 1 million in 98 days. That was April 28th. In the last 10 days, we've had now our 10 millionth person tested positive. So in the last 10 days, another 1 million. So we've gone from 98 days to 10 days. Gives you an idea of how fast this is spreading on a nationwide basis. Anyway, enough of that. I can also tell you there is some good news out there, and that's what I really would like to focus on today. I hope you saw the good news regarding Connecticut's very own Pfizer, along with BioNTech, has created a vaccine that has had very good, strong, positive results in the early trials. 90% effective, more effective than we had probably anticipated before. And that's based upon a sample of tens of thousands of volunteers. And we're looking now for FDA preliminary approval, perhaps in the next month or so. And we have a long way to go. I don't want to overstate this, but you're not going to have to hear from me on this. We've got Dr. John Burkhart is one of our guests here today. And Dr. Burkhart runs drug safety R&D at Pfizer out of Groton. He's been on the front line of their accelerated efforts to get a safe and effective vaccine out to you. And Pfizer, along with some of the other pharma companies that are pushing on this, have already started manufacturing. So once we get these approvals and we know that they're safe, then and only then we roll them out, and hopefully we'll be able to roll them out quickly. In addition, we have another guest who's going to be taking the lead for our state in terms of how this does get rolled out to different populations and what those priorities are. You remember that Deirdre Gifford, our head of public health, has the vaccine advisory board, and her co-pilot is Reg Eady, who runs Trinity Healthcare. And Reg will also be able to follow up and talk a little bit about where our planning is now in getting the vaccine distributed. But first, let me give you a quick catch-up on the Biden-Harris transition team and their focus on the COVID-19 Taskforce and leading with science. And there's some interesting Connecticut connections here, so I guess I wanted to accent them. The 3 co-chairmen is number 1, David Kessler. You probably remember him, FDA commissioner, Yale School of Medicine. Number 2, Dr. Marcella Nunez-Smith. She's at Yale School of Medicine as well, and she was an active member of our Reopen Committee. And she led our community outreach as we realized that having the testing, having the therapies, and then having the vaccines only works as long as you've got credibility within the greater community so that those populations feel comfortable and confident taking, in this case, the vaccine. So she's gone from our Reopen Committee to the Biden-Harris transition. Finally, the other co-chairperson is Dr. Vivek Murthy. He's a graduate of a Yale School of Medicine and Yale School of Management. Josh likes to point out he was a classmate of Josh's at Yale School of Management. I probably went to school with his grandfather there. So I think you're seeing that the transition committee at the federal level has been guided by what's going on at the state level and guided in part by what's going on with some of the folks we had taken the lead here in Connecticut. Another friend of ours, Dr. Scott Gottlieb from Westport, one of our advisors, wrote this piece in the op-ed of the Wall Street Journal today. States are laboratories for COVID control. They talked about what Larry Hogan's doing in Maryland, what Charlie Baker's doing in Massachusetts with testing, and talked a lot about Connecticut's plan as we have a targeted mitigation measure. And we ramped up very slowly and cautiously, and as we opened, our infection rate went down. Then when it started going up again, we've ramped back down to 2.1. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, we'll see whether those changes are making any difference in the rate of increase in COVID infections. I'll just finally, before I ask our guests to say a few words, the COVID-19 plan from the Biden-Harris team came out. It sort of reflects a lot of what we've been doing in Connecticut, a lot of what you see going on in a number of the other states. A massive increase in testing. I think we've already done a lot of that, as I described. They want to double the amount of testing, make it easier, take it to the underserved communities, get folks tested, and if they're found to be positive, we're there earlier, so we can treat them earlier, which is important. They're going to put a lot of research in the next generation testing. You know what we're doing in terms of wastewater. You know what we're doing in terms of saliva, other ways to make it easier and less expensive and more effective testing methods. The Pandemic Testing Board, it follows on FDR's War Production Board, really so we can ramp up production in strong measure in terms of testing, then the therapies, as you know about what we're doing on the vaccines. And finally, the Public Health Jobs Corps. As we may find, we need additional, nurses and docs. I think I described the other day that back in May, the pandemic did not spread evenly across the state and across the country. So we're able to mix and match people and events and the such, depending on where the need was. This time, I'm afraid it spread very quickly across our state and across our country, so we have to maximize use hospital by hospital. But look, let me just give you the good news on the vaccines and other important work we're doing. And with that, I'd just like to introduce you to John Burkhart. John's been a good friend. Pfizer's a great neighbor. And we know we have a lot of work to do, John, but congratulations for the work you've done to date.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this today. Many of you have heard the good news. It's been in the national news, an interim readout from the ongoing study showing 90+% effectiveness. That means protecting patients vaccinated from getting a COVID infection. I'd like to remind you that we really think about three major components as far as delivering a vaccine to the patient, and it's efficacy, safety, and then it's continuous manufacturing with quality. And today we reported out on the first of those, an interim readout that included 94 patients with the 90+% protection rate against infection. The efficacy, therefore, very strong. The safety component is still reading out. We would like to get at least 60 days post-second injection, 2 injections to immunize the patient. So a 60-day runtime and at least 6,000 of the volunteers in the study. We need a couple of more weeks to reach that milestone. Then we will have this interim safety readout. The manufacturability, quality, those are ongoing, looking very good. Those are ongoing activities, and some of that is occurring right here in our laboratory in Groton, Connecticut.
Let me ask one question, just because I think it's on everybody's mind. You move very fast to get this vaccine tested and hopefully distributed in the relatively near future. Any compromises people should worry about in terms of safety?
Yeah, it's a great great question. Pfizer has been in the vaccine business for quite a number of years with many products on the market, many also in development for other infectious diseases. So there's a great history, subject matter expertise, and scientific basis to draw upon when we go about this long task of discovering and developing new vaccines. So with this particular vaccine, no corners were cut. We followed this tried and true methodology that has worked so well for us in the past and continues to deliver really superior and safe products. What's really been quick here has been that we undertook the manufacturing in parallel. So normally you wouldn't spend $1 billion to manufacture a product that may not work. You wait to see whether it works and whether it's safe, and then you do the manufacturing. So we did that at risk, and that was a decision made very early in the process. So that's saving us a lot of time. And then the other big time savings, in addition to getting very quickly the discovery into clinical patients, into the clinical study, the time has really been that we've enrolled over 43,000 patients. There's been a great volunteerism that we've seen with Connecticut residents across the United States into Latin America, for people really being interested in volunteering to be in the trial. So we quickly were able to recruit this high number of patients. And then, unfortunately, as the governor just mentioned, the infection rate has been going up, and this is an event-based trial. So we could do interim readouts at different points in time based on an event. And in this case, the event is patient, it's blinded, but a patient gets the disease, gets the diagnosis of having COVID, and then that's an event in the study. We also moved over 150 sites for clinical studies, and we were able to really emphasize locations where virus was spreading more quickly. So, for example, at one point, Governor, I'll congratulate you, Connecticut, and everyone listening, Connecticut was having a really low rate of infection, so we began to emphasize enrolling patients in other places. So we tried to go where the infection was occurring to really protect those patients faster and get this kind of count.
Hey, thank you, John. John will be here to answer questions in a minute. Reg, it looks like you could have millions of doses ready for distribution around the country in a couple of months. What are we doing to get ready?
Yeah, thank you, Governor. So we have had a series of conversations or meetings since you have put together your vaccine advisory group. And just as a reminder, we have three subgroups. We've got the allocation subgroup, who has the responsibility of sort of asking the question, who? From a priority perspective, once we have vaccine available and we understand that the supply is going to be less than the demand, this subcommittee will be responsible for creating a prioritization of who we will administer the vaccine to first. Second is the science subcommittee, and the intention here is not for them to repeat the work that the Pfizers and the FDA and the ACIP have done, but just to do an evaluation of, and I'm glad John just described it because it helps us out a lot for us to be have access to that intelligence and to communicate the great work that you've done so that we can better understand how we catalyze getting to the vaccine. So it's that subcommittee's responsibility to communicate that to the advisory group. And then there's a communication subcommittee who takes everything that we've done. They answer the question, the who, when, where, why, and how. And they are responsible for, in partnership with the advisory group, advising the governor's office on all the information. We talked about transparency. We talked about demonstrating trustworthiness. And so that is how we're going to, that's the group that will be responsible for communicating that. This is great news, and it's great to have, a home state partner here to get us over this hump. As you indicated, Governor, we're seeing a resurgence of COVID. The good news about this time around is that, capacity is there. We know a lot more than we knew back in March. And what we're currently doing, to answer your question, is we're partnering with hospitals, healthcare systems, and local health departments to find out who has the capacity for things like storing the vaccine, which takes special instrumentation, so that once the vaccine lands, and it sounds like we're going to have it in the very near future, we will be prepared to appropriately allocate the vaccine to the citizens of the state of Connecticut.
Thank you. So Reg Eady and John Burkhardt are here along with Josh and Paul. I'm happy to take your questions.
All right, thank you. We'll start with Hearst, Connecticut Media.
Hey, Governor, how's it going? Just to start, a couple of colleges last week said that they're announcing curfews in response to your recommendation. Are you worried that because that's not a recommendation, are you worried that that's too restrictive? And also, does the state have a plan going forward for all of the kids who are going to be moving out and moving back with the Thanksgiving break?
No, I don't think it's too restrictive. I think a lot of these colleges have seen some flare-ups, often related to parties, so I think they're taking the appropriate action. We're doing everything we can to keep the colleges open until the Thanksgiving vacation, when kids will be going home for probably a couple of months. What we're doing around the rest of the state is just guidance, trying to tell people to stay close to home, especially if you're older, especially after 10 o'clock at night. Probably safer to be at home.
Thanks. And then this is for John. Was the news of the trial withheld in any way because of the results of the election? I think people are going to want to ask that.
Oh, sure. No. So this has always been an event and data-driven readout. So part of the timing was based upon accumulating the events. And then part of the guidance from the US FDA, so the events were about the efficacy. You remember that? So then the second part was this runtime of safety for patients 60 days after the second dose. And so we are only a couple of weeks away from also having that data set. But those two, because they go so closely together, are being reported together, and you're hearing that now.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the Hartford Courant.
Yeah, hi. First of all, for Governor Lamont or for anybody else, have you all worked with Marcella Nunez-Smith, and what can you say about what she will bring to the committee that the president-elect has put together?
Thanks, Alex. Josh, you worked with Marcella the most.
Yeah, Marcella was one of the key leaders on the Reopen Connecticut Advisory Group. She co-chaired the Communities Committee, which was heavily focused on ensuring that we were putting in place resources and strategies to help mitigate the impacts of COVID on populations that have been most impacted, particularly in our cities and minority communities, and was very influential in actions that we took to put in place a number of the supports that the governor's announced over the past months. Focused testing events in our cities, additional supports for people who need to quarantine and isolate but may not have the rooms in their home, or may not have may need supports from food or cash assistance to be able to do that. And so her thinking is woven throughout our COVID response. And we're so proud that she's been chosen for this amazing responsibility, and have tremendous confidence she's going to do an amazing job leading us forward, advising the president-elect.
I also wanted to ask, I spoke today to a hospital administrator who said their wait times for COVID testing have really increased due to demand increasing for testing. I'm wondering, both from Reggie, if that's something that they've seen, and also from Governor Lamont, if that's something that you guys are worried about moving forward.
Go ahead, Reg.
Yeah, so testing, certainly the demand has increased over the last couple of weeks, no question about it. I don't know that our wait time has necessarily been impacted, because we have the ability to get to the test very quickly. And we also have new technology that we will have, we'll likely announce it in the next week or two, so that we'll do a larger number of tests, and the turnaround time will be done more quickly. So all this is happening right at the perfect time. More testing, faster results, a vaccine, and the governor's vaccine advisory group. So putting that all together, I am very comfortable that we're in a good place as a state.
Amplify that. We're working with local labs wherever possible. Vast majority of our tests come back in real time from local labs, or at least within a day or two. And as you know, we're now doing about 75,000 BioNTech tests on a weekly basis. And those are instant results, or results within 15 minutes. So we're doing everything we can to get you a quick resolution in terms of infection or not infection.
And then one more question from me. The state has reported more infections in schools in the last week or two than it had been. Is that beginning to creep onto your radar in terms of spread in the schools?
I know with a lot more testing, you are seeing more infections, less taking place in the classroom, more taking place outside of the classroom. But you're right. When you get into community spread, that's why restaurants and classrooms and other places that we used to be able to cordon it off are a little bit more at risk right now. I still would tell you that wearing a mask in a third grade classroom is one of the safest places to be.
All right, thank you.
All right, moving on to News 8.
Congratulations to Pfizer. It's all everyone's talking about. The timeline that we're hearing, a couple of months, possibly millions of doses. But to give people a realistic perspective of what they can understand or expect, what are some of the challenges? The cold chain, talk about that maybe, and also a two-part dose.
Do you want to start with that, John? It was the challenges getting distributed. Certainly the two-part dose, you got to monitor that for 3.5 million people. Times 2, that would be 7 million vaccinations. Tell us about some of those challenges there, John.
Oh, hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Lost connectivity during the preceding couple of sentences. Could you restate that?
I think it was just some of the challenges related to getting the vaccine, especially given the fact it takes a double injection. I think it's 2 weeks apart. What advice do you have for states?
Yeah, it's a good question. Many of you also know that we have to keep the product very cold and shipped in very much sub-freezing temperatures. Then there will be a short term of stability, perhaps at refrigerated temperatures. And that's going to be a logistical challenge. We're working very hard on that. There's a whole fleet of very experienced and talented people at Pfizer who are solely working on this, and an army of people. And so it's going to be important to work with the authorities, with state governments and others to provide that supply chain. And I think that's the challenge going forward. We are optimistic about that. We do share the concern that it's something that needs to be done very precisely and very correctly.
Thank you.
All right, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
Yes, a question for Dr. Eady, and maybe I missed this, but when it comes to the vaccine, what is the most up-to-date distribution plan for our state? Who will get it first, and then how can they get one? What's the vision for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at this point, when I talked about the allocation subcommittee, their role is to decide or prioritize the distribution of the vaccine. Now, of course, whatever definitive approach we take, it has to be aligned with the CDC's ACIP recommendations. But to answer your question, at this point, if there was a vaccine available, we would prioritize it for healthcare workers, frontline staff, the elderly, those who are high risk, who have multiple comorbidities, nursing home, and other areas that could be considered hotspots. That will be how we prioritize the distribution.
And what's your vision for the access of it? Do you envision it being like how we're getting testing right now, where you go to your local CVS, you go to drive-throughs in hospitals? What's the rollout for that?
Yeah, at this point, we think that there will be 3 phases. The first phase, as you can imagine, would be a phase where the demand is greater than the supply. The second phase, they will sort of balance each other out. In the third phase, there will be more supply than the demand. So we don't know the timelines on those, but initially, we think that we will be partnering with healthcare systems or individual hospitals, local health departments to decide who has the capacity to store it. As John alluded to, his vaccine or Pfizer's vaccine has to have very low temperatures, so you've got to have that capability. But we imagine at this point that local health departments and hospitals will be the primary, at least in phase one, vaccinators.
And now a question for the governor and some of the doctors on this call. You know, we're seeing more of these anti-lockdown protests, and part of that does question the vaccine itself. So how do you assure that the public is safe when there are doubts of pockets in the public? And what are your thoughts on these protests in general?
Well, I'd say it's a little contradictory to be so skeptical about vaccines and yet having anti-lockdown protests. I mean, one of the ways we can keep our economy open, keep our schools open, is taking the necessary precautions, as we described. And let's face it, the vaccine is going to take months before it's rolled out in a really totally effective way. So we're going to have to stay cautious, for a little bit longer. So those would be the two messages I'd have. You want to add something to that, anybody?
Yeah, I'll just add, so one of the greatest challenges we have as an advisory group is just that. It's how do we assure or convince people that this vaccine is safe? I will tell you that, listening to John, I had the privilege of having a conversation with him and one of his teammates prior to this press conference. And I was asking those very questions. I have access to a lot of the same information that you have access to. But boy, it was very comforting for John to explain to me how that, for example, and he alluded to this earlier, how they catalyzed this entire process by doing things in parallel versus in series, right? They were lucky enough to get a number of volunteers up front, which under normal circumstances, you wouldn't have that many people available. And they've already started production. In series, once they've gotten through this part, the production could take one source I recall suggested it could take up to 15 to 24 months just to produce the vaccine. They've already started that. So once it's approved, I can explain to our citizens, once it's approved, then I can better articulate what I've learned from John, and I'm going to learn more. Apparently, there's a webinar that will provide education to a group of people. But I'm going to continue to sort of keep my ear to the ground, to have conversations with experts like John so that I can better understand, because I'm going to take it as well, and I don't mind taking it publicly. But my role on behalf of the governor is to make sure that we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's, and this is the right thing to do. And so far, I'm super excited because it sounds like it is the right thing to do, and it will allow us to get our arms around this resurgence of COVID. John, did I get that right? Anything you want to add to that?
Sounds really good. Just like to add, and I alluded to this earlier, about the tried and true methodology for discovery and development of vaccines and the safety part of that. And we've got a long history of that. These methods are used by Pfizer as well as all the other manufacturers who have been producing safe and efficacious vaccines. And so there's this huge wealth to draw upon for this type of work. And all of that has been applied, and every I dotted and every T crossed, and this is just a very precise, very serious, and we are just clearly committed to that. And then there's the recognition that we follow the science, and we hope for certain outcomes. We've got a great outcome today. We're very excited about that. That was scientific. We didn't know until that data came what it would yield. So this is a deeply scientific process, tried and true, and that's what we're following, and we'll see where it leads.
And final one from me now, Governor, I apologize. Why are Massachusetts athletes who play soccer and hockey able to come and play in our state while the Massachusetts governor has essentially banned Connecticut kids from playing in their state?
They're not coming to play in our state. We're not having any of these interstate competitions at all. And they've been a source of spread. We saw that in Boston, by the way. We've had a couple of incidents here in this state. So the quarantine works in both directions when it comes to interstate sports.
also add one other thing as well. What Massachusetts put forth was actually in collaboration with the state of Connecticut as well as Rhode Island. We have all collectively have come up with those same guidelines to stop interstate related travel for sports tournaments. And then we also are working with more regional states as it deals with other related collaborations to stop this type of travel for sports events.
All right, thank you. Moving on to NBC Connecticut.
Hi, everybody. Matt Austin with NBC Connecticut. My first question was to John. Can you say how many employees in Groton were working on this project and how critical they were to what we've seen so far?
Absolutely. That's a great question. We really like to talk about the work in Connecticut as well as what we do everywhere among our sites. We probably have had around 200 of our employees working on this project. It's a little hard to give a clear number because there are many of us who work on lots of projects. And so this would be one of the projects that some people work on. And then there are others who do nothing but this project, and they do it round the clock. So it's really been this great collaborative effort among our research sites. And I'm really proud of the role that Groton has played in this.
And at this point, in terms of the vaccine, do we know how long it would be effective for? Would it be like a flu shot that you would have to get every year?
This leads back to the question about it's the science, and we follow the science, and we do not know the answer to that question. So we will be learning about that from the current clinical trial. Also like to mention that we will follow those patients out for 2 years with an emphasis on safety, but we will then also begin to gather other types of data, such as to answer the question that you just asked.
Thank you. And Governor, do you have any concern that as people hear about a vaccine, they might start letting their guard down and have potentially some less enthusiasm for tougher restrictions in the coming months?
I do. I mean, look, we're trying to present the science as we see it. It's good news. It's going to take many months to roll out. And all the precautions we can take in terms of masks and distancing in the meantime will make a world of difference. Somebody asked previously about the, anti-lockdown, protests and the such. Look, we've got an infection rate of 3.7%. They were not as restrictive in a place like South Dakota, which has a 40 or 50% infection rate. And don't think this is a milder form of COVID, less fatalities. I'm afraid you're seeing the fatalities ramp up again around the country following the higher infection rates. Don't take anything for granted.
And do we have any idea, finally, just how many doses that we potentially would receive?
I could just say what I've understood from Pfizer, which is maybe 5 to 10 million. Not we, but the country by the end of this year. And I think you've got a plan for, 150 or so million by the end of next year?
Yeah, good commentary on that. So at least 5 to 10, we could see up to 50 million this year. We're hopeful on that. And then we could be at the 1 billion or more next year as the manufacturing really kicks into high gear. So those are the things that we are hoping for.
We usually get about 1% of the total if you're doing the math in your head.
All right, thank you. Fox 61.
Hi, this is Taylor DiCello. My first question may be best answered by Dr. Eady. When do you project that widespread distribution of the vaccine would begin beyond initial priority populations?
Yeah, that is determined. So the rate limiting factor there would be the availability of the vaccine. So when the Pfizers and other producers of the vaccine create the situation which I described in phase 2, where either the supply is equal to the demand or the supply is greater than the demand, that's when we will expand the number of vaccinators throughout the state.
And if every person has to get 2 injections, would that up to 50 million doses go to 25 million people, or does 1 dose equal 2 injections?
Yeah, that is my understanding of how that works, but John would
Oh, yes, thank you. Clarify that that is exactly the case, that each immunized patient needs 2 doses. And so if you do the math, to clarify, the 50 million doses would immunize 25 million patients.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. News 12, Connecticut.
Hi, everyone. Governor, I want to follow up on the safety concerns that some people have. You know, we talked to a lot of doctors today. They say their biggest concern is that people just aren't going to take this vaccine because they're scared of it. And you've probably seen the Data Haven survey that says close to 40% of people in Connecticut either won't take it or aren't sure. Any thought that you would require this vaccination to get our numbers down and get people vaccinated?
No, John, that's not the way I'm thinking about it, but you're right. I've seen the same analysis. I was interested that doctors, 60% said they'd be inclined to take it in early dose, and 40% of nurses. So that's why John is here. We wanted to give people some confidence that we're following all the safety protocols. We've had tens of thousands of tests in the clinicals going forward, so we'll be tracking this carefully. But I think by far the best way to do this is on a voluntary basis. Look, at the end of the day, you're more likely to get a flu shot in Connecticut than just about any other state. People know how important and safe and effective that can be, and I'd like to think COVID will follow the same track.
So, Reggie, I guess the follow-up for you is, do you envision some sort of, I guess, public information campaign or, going along with this to try to get people on board voluntarily?
Absolutely. So the subcommittee, the communication subcommittee is right now having conversation around creating a variety of venues in which we can talk about the work that we've done, talk about the advice that we're giving the governor, and, sort of close the gap, answer all the questions so that we can ensure that the majority of the people, and I happen to think that those stats that we just talked about aren't bad at all because we don't have a vaccine. So 60% of the physicians and 40% of the nurses and probably 50% of the population without a vaccine is already saying that they're willing to take it. Imagine once we are transparent and communicate to them the great work that companies like Pfizer has done to ensure safety, I'm sure that number will increase. And just like the flu vaccination, the state of Connecticut will be just fine.
And just one follow-up question for John. Can you talk about exactly what role Groton plays in testing the safety of this vaccine?
Sure. So safety it's an overall composite of work that's done in cells, in animals, and then into the clinical situation. So we have supported the animal safety work in Groton, and then the clinical studies, of course, are not conducted on our premises. Over 150 sites, around the world conducting those, and so we have some of the specialists who help us to conduct those studies and design them, and then do the logistical conduct of those studies. So it's really a broad spectrum of scientific expertise that we have at the site here in Connecticut that helps us to progress such an ambitious program with the vaccine.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you. Up next is Connecticut Mirror.
Thanks, Rob. I just had one question for Mr. Burkhart. Please tell me if I'm understanding this correctly. After you complete the safety data collection, you'd be seeking sometime around the end of this month FDA approval. What type of a turnaround is that, and how long, even for something as important as this, how long can that take?
Sure, that's a great question. Let's maybe speak first about the type of approval for which we will seek a filing, and that's the Emergency Use Access, or EUA, as you've heard people speak. And that's really a very specialized program in which a limited approval is achieved, and this occurs very quickly. So, for example, there's been a close partnership with FDA, everything from study design to FDA working with the Data Monitoring Committee for keeping tabs on the studies going. So we would anticipate a rapid turnaround. Usually these things are many months for review. I would expect it's weeks rather than months for the EUA approval or review and hopefully approval. Now, subsequent to that, to move to large-scale production or vaccination of patients, we would file a biologic licensing application, or BLA, which would be the full formal type of application, and that would proceed perhaps a little slower timeline, but we've seen the agency being just very helpful. They are working around the clock to review data and ask questions and get to resolutions on any question. So two application types proceeding a little bit different timelines, EUA coming first, the BLA coming next.
Thank you.
All right, up next is the Day of New London.
Hi, yes, I have two questions. One kind of piggybacking off of some of the other questions people have asked. This is a question for John or anybody else, really. How do you plan on not just assuring people who may be skeptical or have concerns about the vaccine, but also combating any misinformation? You know, if there's misinformation either from individual people online or from organized groups, how do you plan to address that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe I can give an initial commentary and others could join in. I guess we are really focused on the science, where the science leads us, what the data tells us, and then we need to educate others about what that means. So we don't expect that people are spending their spare time, reading up on all these details. May not have the subject matter expertise, and so it needs to be real for them. And so these complex data sets and the deep science needs to be made, understandable to a wide range of people. And so I think we'd like to partner with that type of thing. And indeed, in really successfully treating disease, we have found that when physicians and patients are well informed about the disease, understand the treatment, and can connect all the dots, we are far more likely to have adherence to treatment regimens. We are far more likely to have successful outcomes with treatment, and it would seem that vaccination would follow those same principles with which we've had experience in the past. Perhaps Reggie would like to comment.
Yeah, so once the baton is sort of passed from the Pfizers to the states, in partnership and independent of people like John, we have our science committee that will take a second look to understand what was done, how it was done, so that they can advise the communications subcommittee, and they have the responsibility primarily of explaining to the entire state in whatever form they want to receive the information. So that's our challenge, to make sure we understand that, so that we can make sure that the truth is being spread about the process that Pfizer underwent, as well as the work that we've done as an advisory group. So we've got subject matter experts throughout the state who are going to be partnering to better understand that, who speaks their language, and then we will relay that to the state of Connecticut to dispel any of the myths that may exist.
I'll just add to what Reggie said. We've got the scientific community represented on his committee, but we've also had members of religious leadership. We also have labor leaders. We have community leaders. We have legislative leaders. So folks from your community are also there explaining why it's safe to take this vaccine, when it's safe to take this vaccine.
And one more question was, this would be for John. Do you know kind of roughly a timeline of when we might get more information on whether the vaccine prevents the most severe cases, or if the vaccine prevents people from getting the virus who may be asymptomatic and not know they have the virus?
Yeah, Erica, that's a great question, and you're really, I guess, showing an interest and a passion for the data that we also share. We just need some time. for this to play out. And then we've only been able to thus far share some commentary from the Data Monitoring Committee, and there's going to be a more robust data set there as the study goes to completion. So it completes at 164 cases. So we've got about 70 more of those to accrue. And then we'll get this longer running safety data. 2 months is critical, and then monitoring for up to 2 years. And I think when we have that kind of data set at our disposal, we can start to answer some of the questions you're asking.
Thank you.
All right, up next is Connecticut News Junkie.
Thanks, Rob. Governor, what is our 7-day rolling average for the state right now?
3.8%.
And you said it was concerning you. The hospitalizations sort of are rising quickly. It looks like where you said we were at 50% capacity in ICUs. Do we have models for when that may become an issue?
I'll start with this and maybe pass it over to Josh. One of the things I'm finding on the infection rate is, it's bouncing around and it's going up, but it's not going up like a hockey stick. And I think I take that as relative good news compared to maybe what we saw 6 months ago. What you see in the hospitalizations is sort of a 2 or 3 week lag based on infection rates, and our infection rates were going up a lot back then. So let's see how that sorts out. But Josh, do you have any models on where you see capacity?
Yeah, and I'd also, certainly defer to Dr. Eady to comment on the ICU topic, because I know from a clinical perspective that some of the approaches that he and his team and our doctors around the state are taking to treat COVID patients is less intensive for ICU beds than it had been in the first wave. But we do look at a lot of models. There's a wide range of projections. We do look at some of the more severe scenarios because that's what we want to plan for, right? We want to be prepared in case some of those more severe scenarios are coming. But as we've talked about before, models are just estimates, and ultimately, the outcomes are dependent on the actions that we all take in this state to wear masks, to follow the rules, to maintain our distance, and to prevent the chains of transmission that we're seeing occur right now. But Dr. Eady, maybe you could comment on the changing approach to treating COVID patients and how that changes our need for ICU beds.
Yeah, so the good news is that we learned a lot from our first time around. There were hospitals in the state of Connecticut that participated in some unique studies from a plasma perspective. So, in hospitals in Connecticut, we now have treatments or responses to COVID, even in the intensive care setting, where we are comfortable that the length of stays are going to be shorter. We're going to see it's certainly not an increase, but we expect a decrease in both morbidity and mortality. So I think we're in a much better position now to handle the load that we're expecting to get. But the fact that we're having this conversation in the midst of an announcement that came out today from Pfizer, that just that provides, I think, some reassurance for our future, and that we won't need the extra capacity that we utilized in the past, or that we prepared for in the past as well.
Right. Josh, I know we had spoken last month about a potential contact tracing phone app that you guys were estimating would come online by the end of October. Where do we stand on that?
I would recommend tuning back into the governor's press conference on Thursday for some updates on that one.
Okay, gotcha. On the education teacher front, I understand that in some towns there may have been a shortage of teachers. Teachers are having to quarantine as they're getting exposed. Is our education department working on this? Is this a problem throughout the state?
I know that Miguel has been watching this carefully, and there have been a number of cases where teachers, didn't feel comfortable coming in or did have to quarantine. I will tell you one of the great advantages of the BioNTech test that I referred to before is you get an instant response. So at least we don't have any false or unnecessary quarantines, and that allows more of our teachers to be in the classroom safely.
Okay, but are there any towns where they are running short on teachers, I guess is what I'm asking.
I have to get back to you on those specifics, I think.
Okay. All right, thanks, everybody.
All right, up next is the Waterbury Republican American.
Okay, what about these freezers? Is the state going to be providing funding to sort of purchase and, I guess, install them? Is this something the federal government will be asked to do?
Reg or John?
Yeah.
Or Josh?
Dr. Eady can comment. So we're fortunate in the state that our hospitals already have a significant amount of capacity of these ultra low temperature freezers. And so we're working with them. But Dr. Eady, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to your question. What I do know, though, is that because of the governor's expectation, many of the hospitals in Connecticut have responded accordingly. So, we are expanding, which is an expense. We're expanding our ability to store from -70 to -80 degrees Celsius. And so we did not comfortably have the capacity to store thousands, but now we do, or we will by the time the vaccine is available. And the other hospitals are responding accordingly as well. Now, if I had to guess, I would say that maybe the CARES Act support to some degree, just that it did with the testing, may provide some support. But I think right now, that is not primary in our minds. What's primary is preparing ourselves for the vaccine once it's available, which is going to be in the very near future, and making sure that we get the citizens in the state of Connecticut vaccinated as quickly as possible.
Okay, and sort of just doing the math, as the governor suggested earlier, if there's going to be 5 to 10 million doses available at the end of the year, that's what, about 50,000 to 100,000 doses that Connecticut can expect?
Hi, this is John with a comment is, 5 to 10 million is conservative, and up to 50 million, we believe, is like possible, if not likely. And then we can get back to your question on the math.
Yeah, and I think the governor said that we should expect to get somewhere around 1% of that.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
All right. And I had a question about a nurse. Maybe this might be something for Josh, or perhaps the governor knows, or Paul. The Watertown Convalarium, we're being told that there's an outbreak there. I looked on the report from last week. There was just within that reporting period, 2 staff cases and 1 patient. Can you give us any kind of information on how many staff and patients there have been infected? Are patients being moved? And when might, if it's being closed, when might it be reopened?
Yeah, Paul, so Department of Public Health is certainly aware of an outbreak at that facility, and they're working with the facility to contain it, but the matter is under investigation. I don't have the very latest numbers for you, but we can probably get those.
Oh, okay. All right. I guess that'll be it for me. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the Associated Press.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Governor, can you address this idea of the president-elect getting national standards in place when we haven't had any, and what that will mean for the state? And how concerned are you that there will be conflicting messages between the president-elect's panel and then the president's panel?
I think the president-elect's panel and Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and a vast majority of the states will all be speaking with one voice when it comes to masks, when it comes to protocols, and then when it comes to vaccines. And I think that will be a big step forward for all of us in terms of convincing people to do the right thing.
Okay. And John, can you address, are there any populations that you found would not be good to get a vaccine, and are you seeing side effects? And if so, what are they?
Sure. The study's ongoing, so that's a caveat with anything that I'm answering today. Is 43,000 plus patients, just to remind about that, and then 42% are of ethnic and racial background that's considered diverse. So our approach has been to really enroll lots of patients, gain lots of diversity, in that population by going to the places where we can enroll diversity, and then to learn from that data as it plays out in the study. So you're asking some really good questions. Currently, we don't have the sub-level of detail to answer those, but we believe we've got the kind of clinical trial design and subsequently data set that will be very informative.
And finally, Governor, can you address what's going on in terms of the restaurants and whether they can or cannot use these outside tents and igloos, and has there been an agreement reached, and when do those changes start?
Now, when it comes to those igloos, it's really a matter of having some ventilation there. And I think they've reached an agreement, and we've done this with our regional states as well, how you can use those igloos. That's great. You have your self-contained pod. You're more in an outside environment, less likely to, contaminate anybody else. So we're doing everything we can to make it easier for the restaurants to keep going in this tough time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, moving on to WTIC 1080 News.
John, you mentioned 200 workers. Just quickly, is that in Groton or is that worldwide? How does that break down?
That's a great question. So I was referencing Groton with the 200. I actually could not begin to estimate the worldwide population in our company working on this.
Yeah, it's more of a Groton question, I guess.
Yeah.
Can you explain in layman's terms why this, and I apologize about the background noise, why this vaccine has to be kept at 80 below?
Oh, sure. It has to do with really the biology and the physicochemical properties that come with that. So the active agent is mRNA, and that we know will degrade if not stored in those kind of low temperatures. And we want to avoid any kind of degradation because we'd like patients to receive the full dose and be able to mount the maximal appropriate immune response. And so there's that component. And then in the subsequent preparation, it's mixed with some lipids, carefully defined set of lipids that create a lipid nanoparticle. And so there's stability related to that construct as well. So it's complex biology. It's driven by physicochemical properties, of the materials. And we learned that the ultra low temperature has really been the way to preserve the integrity of the product.
60 Minutes did a piece last night about how the military is involved in this massive distribution. Have you guys talked about at all the historic size of this? Is this the biggest vaccine distribution ever coming up?
It's a great question. I would only be speculating to answer that. Do others have a perspective?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either, John.
I'm a politician. We always speculate. My strong instinct, this is by far the largest vaccination effort in the history of the world.
We do not disagree.
All right, thank you. And up last is Connecticut Public Media.
With that, let me just say, Reg, thank you again for your service on the advisory board. And John, to you and Pfizer, Connecticut's very own, taking the lead. I don't want to overstate. We have a number of steps to go in terms of safety, in terms of effectiveness, in terms of getting us out, in terms of getting this vaccine distributed. But boy, it was a very good news what we woke up to today. And I'd also just like to give a special shout out to our veterans. Wednesday, I believe, is Veterans Day, and it's ironic. It's just a few days after an election. These are folks who serve their country, often their lives at risk for your right to vote and our democratic values. So it's timely. And it's worth remembering that it was back in 1918 during that Spanish flu that folks were celebrating the veterans in a bond parade, that you did have this second wave of the pandemic back then, a little like we're having our second wave now. So thank a veteran, but thank them from a social distance. Thank you, everybody.